Welcome everyone to my Australian Grand Prix driver ratings. Yes, it's taken a little bit longer than I would like to get this video together for you guys, but we've still got it out before the Chinese Grand Prix, so it's still relevant. Now, how am I going to be rating these drivers? So, for the duration of this season, we are going to rate them based upon their overall weekend performance. So, that means qualifying and their race on the Sunday. I'm not talking about practice. So when we do have sprint races, I will be rating them for their sprint quali and their sprint races performance, as well as, of course, the main quali and the race on Sunday. But practice, we are not taking into consideration. It's practice at the end of the day. No one really cares. They're all trying to do completely different things, aren't they? So it's not relevant. Even if someone crashes, they can recover their weekend with a good qualifying and a good race, so it doesn't really matter. So, yeah, that's how I'm rating them. You guys are also getting involved in this. Each week I'll be putting up a Google form for you to fill out and rate the drivers from 1 to 10. If you can try and measure them and rate the drivers in the same format that I'm doing, that would be absolutely great, but each to their own. You all have your own ways of rating drivers. I understand that. If we all agreed, it would be very boring, wouldn't it? So, lo and behold, let's get into it and let's see what I've given the drivers at a very chaotic Australian Grand Prix opening race of 2025 out of 10. First up is Isaac Hadjar. Started 11th and, well, finished dead last. Didn't even start the race. I think everyone feels a bit sorry for Isaac Hadjar, but overall, it was a very embarrassing moment for him. I don't agree with Helmut Marko's comments that the crying and the tears were embarrassing because it just shows that he cares so much. And look, it's a human reaction sometime, and I don't think we should be vilifying or putting someone down for showing emotion in a moment of just, embarrassment. Yes, but ultimately just sadness for the guy. And thankfully there's nice people still around in the paddock like Anthony Hamilton who go out of their way to console a driver who he knows it means so much to. These drivers have worked tremendously hard to get to the position they're in. Yes, some more than others, but Isaac definitely has done, and that's not how he would have wanted to start his F1 career. But the Saturday was a very good positive for him, qualifying in 11th. Of course, didn't expect him to out-qualify Yuki Tsunoda, who had a tremendous qualifying, but he was the highest rookie qualifier out of everyone, including Antoneli and Lawson in cars that should, you'd think, easily out-qualify an RB. So, for that, however, I still can't give him higher than a 1, because yeah, as much as I have sympathy for him and as much his qualifying was on the Saturday, yeah, I could maybe push it to a 2, but to not even start the race and to crash at the first corner of the formation lap as well, yeah, a moment he'll forget, and hopefully it's a moment he'll look back on and he'll maybe laugh at, I guess, and hopefully what will be a very long and prosperous F1 career for him. And you guys, well, you agree with me. 35% of you have said he should get a 1. Next up is Jack Doohan, another rookie who lost it very early on in the race. Only half a lap completed before he lost control of the car in those treacherous conditions. His qualifying was actually a good qualifying. He started 14th, but you know what? That wasn't deserved at all. He should have qualified so much higher than that and potentially have snuck into Q3. He was outperforming Gasly throughout all of the practice sessions and actually in qualifying up until that point. But Lewis Hamilton, I can't remember the last time I saw Lewis Hamilton spin under his own steam, got in the way of a lap of Jack Doohan that potentially could have got him out of Q2. At least would have got him starting further up the grid and potentially have been the highest rookie qualifier instead of Isaac Hadjar. But yes, unfortunately for him, while I don't believe he's fully at fault for his crash, now you may be thinking, what? Hang on a second. There's very unique circumstances at Albert Park in those conditions. It was slippery, but the reason it was so slippery as well is because of all the road markings, the painted white lines in the middle of the circuit. Yes, we know that drivers and the drivers will know themselves to stay off the white lines on the edge of the circuit. But those are FIA graded or approved paint that are supposed to give more supposed to be grippier than what your standard paint or whatever's used for road markings. And well, there were so many in the middle of the track that is what happened with Jack Doohan. Bono, Kimi Antoneli, and Lewis Hamilton's former race engineer even came on the radio and said as such that Jack Doohan had experienced that left rear slip on the white line. And I'm going to cut Jack a bit of slack here because ultimately there's so much going on in that moment in the first lap. There's loads of cars around you. There's still spray being thrown off of the track. And to look ahead of you in these cars, which you're sitting down in these big F1 cars, the biggest in F1 history, to then focus on every single little white line that's on the race circuit just isn't feasible. And he was just going up the gears, gradual throttle, like all the other drivers were, and he just happenstance to be the guy, unfortunately, who ended up in the barrier. And yeah, no doubt Flavio Briatore is put down a notch, and that's a one step closer to calling on Franco Colapinto. But I think there was enough here this weekend for Jack Doohan to feel positive. However, he still crashed on the first lap, and his qualifying maybe didn't necessarily... I mean, he got further than Isaac Hadjar. I'm going to give him a 2. I'm going to give him a 2 because I feel like his qualifying was actually better than Isaac Hadjar. It had potential to be better than Isaac Hadjar. And I think at least he started the race and at least he got halfway round the lap. And I feel like that warrants a point more than Isaac Hadjar didn't even make it to the start. And for you guys, you gave him a 1. However, it was very close between a 2 and a 3 as well. So a lot of you guys potentially gave him a higher score. I'm going for a 2, but yes, the majority of you just about gave him a 1. Next is Carlos Sainz. Started P10, finished P18. Another driver to not even make it through a single lap in this race. And these are drivers who... We lost 3 cars before the first lap even finished, and they all lost it under their own steam. That's truly amazing. Not often that happens, but yes, that was the nature of these conditions. And well, look, Carlos Sainz, he started off this weekend on a positive note, but it could have been better. I think getting that Williams into Q3 is a positive. We expected them to do well and to be quick compared to the midfield, and they definitely were, qualifying in 6th and 10th. But Sainz could have done better. He didn't get a single decent lap in that Q3 session, and that's why he qualified in 10th compared to Albon, who put that Williams into 6th. You expect more from Sainz, and many did headed into the weekend. But you still maybe expected a driver of Sainz's calibre and experience to do better in the race. But he ended up in the wall at the last corner. Now, Williams are trying to save face a little bit here. The reason for that is supposedly there is a technical glitch with the engine, something mechanically wrong with the car on the upshifts, in safety car conditions or safety car mode. That's the reasoning that Williams and Sainz have come out with. I don't quite necessarily agree with that. I'm a bit dubious of that. Look, teams are going to always try and defend their brand new driver, especially an experienced driver like Carlos Sainz, from embarrassment. They've done it quite considerably with Logan Sargent in times as well, where they've defended him and said it was the car that was the issue and not Logan Sargent. But Sainz, coincidentally, his left rear touched that white line, the road marking in the middle of the track around the last corner, and his car, as it touched that white line, then went round into a spin. It's either a complete coincidence or it is exactly what it is. He's just misjudged it, lost control of the car as he's slightly going up on putting on the accelerator, and the rear's spun up and gone round on him. And that extra torque that spike in torque and revs that he saw under those conditions would be exactly what you'd see from a car that loses traction and the wheels start to rotate considerably more than what you initially were applying on the throttle. So yeah, an error from him, but as I said, was tricky. But considering it was safety car conditions, a driver with his experience should have stayed away from that middle white line, especially as they're going considerably slower, whereas Jack Doohan was in full racing condition. So yeah, Sainz, I'm going to give him a 2 out of 10, purely because of qualifying. It could easily be a 1. If he didn't make it into Q3, I think it definitely would have been a 1. But a 2 out of 10 for Carlos Sainz. And well, you guys, you've got a split vote here. You can't decide whether it's a 1 out of 10 or a 2 out of 10. And it's also quite close with a 3 out of 10 as well. I can see either of those being given, but yes, 2 out of 10 for Carlos Sainz. Next up is Fernando Alonso. Fernando Alonso. It's an uncharacteristic 3 out of 10 for me. Fernando Alonso, we know, is super experienced. He's still got great talent and has still got that pace, even in his mid-40s. And he was doing pretty decent. He was running in the last point scoring position for the majority of the race up until he crashed a car. But he never looked like many really, gaining any more positions. And we know in these conditions that you just need to make it to the end of the race. Look at Hulkenberg. Look at his teammate Lance Stroll. Look at potentially what was on offer. Of course, who knows? I mean, I still think we would have had that crazy stage at the end of the race because that rain was always going to arrive. And then there was another safety car after that. We were actually under racing conditions by that point. But Alonso, I mean, I guess his qualifying was better than I personally expected, but still not great. We know Aston Martin probably putting all focus into 2026. But yeah, regardless if Gasly threw up gravel and cost him a bit of grip in that turn 6 curb, personally looking at it, I think it was a mistake, a very slight mistake, but a very costly one by Fernando Alonso. If you look at his laps and you look at the other drivers of how they were taking that curb, they were covering more curb than Fernando Alonso took at that time. Slight misjudgment, and it was very costly. And I do think that was what was the cause of the crash. So, yeah, 3 out of 10 for Fernando Alonso. And you guys, well, you gave Fernando Alonso a 4 out of 10, close to a 3 out of 10. We're nearly in agreement. I can see a 4 out of 10, but yeah, ultimately, he crashed. Gabriel Bortoleto. Well, I'm going to give Gabriel Bortoleto a 5 out of 10. Now, I'd like to give him more, but he still crashed. Even though he's a rookie, and even though he made it for the majority of the race and crashed, what was it, around 10 laps or so before the end. I do think I just can't give him more than that for a driver who crashes. I'd love to, because I think his qualifying performance was arguably a 10 out of 10, I think, because he out-qualified Antoneli and Lawson, 2 other rookies. Yes, I count Lawson as a rookie still. In cars that should comfortably be beating him. He out-qualified his more experienced teammate as well. And, I mean, to get that stake F1 into Q2 in his first ever qualifying session, bravo, bravo. And just putting kind of to bed the comments, unnecessary comments of Helmut Marko, who, what, did he call him a B-class driver or something? He definitely said something belittling to Gabriel Bortoleto and Jack Doohan in the same breath. Guy just cannot hold his tongue, can he? But yeah, what a great response, and proving why, I mean, at least the pace of what he can do, maybe if he's in a better car, because he is an F3 and F2 back-to-back champion. Now, the race was a bit of a mixed bag for him. He was going pretty decent, drop positions, understandably, in that car, as we expected. And I think the race was going okay for him. He was keeping it clean. He received a 5-second time penalty for no fault of his own for an unsafe release. That's the team's fault, not his fault. And then the crash, look, he crashed in that stage of where the conditions were really tricky, where the rain was coming down in that last sector, and he lost it on the curb. Yes, a driver error. And, well, he was always heading towards the wall anyway, and that suspension, that right rear suspension broke in a weird fashion. Well, Stake have come out and confirmed that basically due to the lateral load and of the way the car was moving and him putting inertia into the wheel and so forth, that's why that suspension broke. Still a weak suspension, if you ask me. Bit of a concern there maybe for Stake F1. But yeah, I think overall it's positive for him, and it would probably be 2 points higher, maybe even 3 points higher if he didn't end up crashing. But yeah, a crash is still a crash regardless of the conditions. And you guys agree with me, you fans. You have given him a 5 out of 10. So we're in agreement there. Next is Liam Lawson, the last of our non-finishers. Can't believe we haven't even got to the first driver that finished the race yet. That's how many didn't finish at Albert Park. But Lawson, let's get straight into it. It's a 1 out of 10 for him. It's a weekend that he'll want to forget. Yes, I do think there are some valid excuses for him, but ultimately he should be doing better. Friday, no running on the Friday practice most definitely didn't help, especially for a driver who had never done a single lap of this track before the weekend in real life. So that is definitely telling, and especially when you're in a car that is a handful, as we can see. Yes, we know how good Max is, but we could see from the onboards that Red Bull was a handful. You need as much practice as you possibly can get. So for him to completely miss all Friday practice and then go straight into his fast laps, yeah, it is a tall order. However, he is still in a car that should make it through to Q2 at the bare minimum. And, well, he could have done. He locked up into the second to last corner, and I think if he'd just taken those last two corners, or at least have made it round those last two corners, I think he had enough to at least get through into Q2. So it was always going to be on the back foot. They changed his setup to a more wet-dependent setup that added a shed load of downforce to the car, and he was just slow in wet conditions. It looked like he had a bit of pace in the dry, better in the dry, but yeah, in those conditions at a track that's already difficult to overtake at, I mean, your race is already done. Qualifying is so important in F1 now these days, especially at a circuit like Albert Park. There's also the excuse as well that he didn't have the same parts as Max Verstappen. The front end was completely different. There were a lot of upgrades that were brought to the car, and he didn't have them compared to Max, who did. And there were even rumours that I heard his engine even sounded different at the track as well. Maybe you guys can confirm that. But regardless, even all of those, he should still be out qualifying Stake F1, like, you know, making it easily through into Q2. And the race, yeah, ended up crashing. Now, I'm not going to be too harsh on him crashing because he was left out on medium tyres when he should have been on intermediates 3 laps prior. Now, yes, you can argue that, well, Ferrari didn't crash and neither did Yuki Tsunoda, but any of those could have still crashed at that moment in time. I think Ferrari, as we'll get onto, we know definitely ballsed up. We know RB ballsed up, and they were fortunate that none of their drivers crashed. And we nearly saw Yuki crash, didn't we, with that big wobble into the last sector, and it could have been so different. But Liam Lawson, I think they forgot he was out on track. Genuinely, they were all focused on Max, I understand, but why did they not double stack him? Why did they not bring Lawson in at the same time Max was coming in and go, right, I guess it's a gamble. I guess maybe they gambled with Lawson because he had track position similar to the Ferraris and maybe RB. But everyone could see, especially Red Bull, who they can see that they've taken the intermediate tyre because the rain is clearly coming down with Max. Why would you not then follow that up with, like, Liam Lawson as well? At least he would not end up in the barrier. So, yeah, many reasons, but still, ultimately, he crashed, didn't make it out of Q1, and really, his season starts in China. And you guys, well, we slightly disagree here. You have given him a 2 out of 10. It is quite close to a 3 out of 10, so maybe you've looked into the caveats. You see the same caveats that I do, but yeah, a 2 out of 10. I can't be too disheartened with your vote. Of course, it's your vote. And yeah, a few of you still agree with a 1, but yeah, overall 1 that he'll want to forget. Next up is Ollie Bearman, and well, we finally got to the driver who have finished the race, the last driver to finish the race, but the first in these ratings. And for me, Ollie Bearman, tough weekend for him. Another one like Liam Lawson where he'll just want to forget. Could be a very long season for him though, with Haas's struggles and how slow they were. But at least he finished the race. That's a positive for him. For me, Ollie Bearman, it's a 4 out of 10 because he at least finished. I do, however, think while I don't take practice sessions into account in these ratings, I do think what he did on the Friday, crashing the car and having to require a new power unit and a new gearbox replacement, and him not being able to do any qualifying, not that maybe he would have qualified any higher than where he initially started, from the pit lane and dead last anyway, with how slow that Haas is. Just look at Esteban Ocon. The fact he wasn't able to even set a competitive lap time, I think, is a knock-on effect of that, even though it is a brand new gearbox. Something that Haas engineers definitely hopefully wouldn't have been expecting heading into the weekend. But at least he finished. Yes, he did have a spin at some point, but I have to give him higher than the likes of the other rookies, especially, who didn't even make it to the starting grid and didn't even make it one lap. And it's a split vote for Ollie Bearman for you guys. The fan vote is split between a 3 and a 4 out of 10. Next is Esteban Ocon, ST Bestie, and, well, I mean, he's a real tricky one to rate here because that Haas is so slow. The positive for Ocon is that he had an uneventful weekend. He kept it out of trouble, he kept it out of the wall, we had no spins, and that's what you need to do when you've got a car that's that far off the pace. The last thing you need to do is put it in the wall and cause your team damage. Just gather the data that is necessary, do what the team wants you to do because you are so far off the pace. Use it as a extra long testing session, and yeah, maybe you can pick up some cheeky places, but unfortunately it seems to be even more so off the pace of the Stake F1 is off the rest of the field, and even Ocon wasn't able to steal some points like Hulkenberg did. So yeah, for me, I'm going to say a 6 out of 10. He deserves a higher score than Ollie Bearman, but I can't give him any higher than that because of how slow the Haas is, and he was just going around on his own for the majority of the race. Next up is Yuki Tsunoda. Oh my God, Yuki. I feel sorry for Yuki. I have been critical of Yuki, and I did say after what was an unbelievable qualifying for him, qualifying in P5, who would have thought he would drag an RB up into P5? A great start to his season. And for running in the points, holding off the Ferraris, holding off Alex Albon for the majority of the race, until he got screwed over by his own team in that strategy call with the Ferraris, but he got screwed over harder than the Ferraris because he ended up coming out not even in the points positions. I think is just, yeah, such a shame for him and so undeserved. And his 12th place finish does not reflect the rating that I'm about to give him, because for me, I genuinely think it was a 10 out of 10 for Yuki Tsunoda this weekend. Yes, what more can a driver do? Seriously, what more could he do? I thought he may fall further down the pack after the race start, as he has done in the past, throw away a decent result, but he held his own, and he was on. He should have finished top 6. I mean, he should have finished behind Charles Leclerc. Just getting screwed over by that strategy is so unfortunate and just unfair, and is not a reflection on how he performed over the whole weekend. So for me, I think Yuki deserves a 10 out of 10, because what more can you possibly do until your team decides to drag you in, or leave you out there, actually, leave you out there on the mediums when it's tipping down with rain, and then end up, yeah, completely out of the points. So not his fault. 10 out of 10 for Yuki, but there's a severe disagreement here between my rating and your ratings, because you guys have given him a 7 out of 10, which is so harsh. So harsh. We were watching the same Yuki at the weekend. I think that's the end result, maybe just affecting some of your ratings there. Of course, you're entitled to your opinion, guys. You're entitled to your opinion. But yeah, for me, not much more he could have done. Next is Pierre Gasly. Ended up finishing, unfortunately, in 11th, just outside the points. And I think that's slightly undeserved for Gasly, to be honest with you, especially when you consider where Hulkenberg and Stroll finished, and even Antoneli, because Antoneli massively benefited from that good strategy call. Yes, it's all part of the game, but Gasly, I think, had a very solid weekend. He looked a bit off the pace in practice, actually looking quite far off the pace compared to his rookie teammate Jack Doohan, but yeah, Gasly, I do rate him quite highly. The fact that he dug deep and was able to get that car into Q3, qualifying P9, and then he stayed with Lewis Hamilton and that fight for 7th and 8th or 6th with Yuki, Albon and Lewis Hamilton for the majority of the race. He just, unfortunately, when it came to that vital moment of going on to the intermediates at the end from the slicks, Alpine just, unfortunately, weren't proactive enough like some other drivers, and he ended up finishing outside of the points, which is undeserved. I think he's another driver like Yuki who deserved at least a points finish there. So solid weekend for him. He had that only real slight wobble, of course, with the two Ferraris overtaking him and then Piastri swiftly after. So maybe could he have held on to those positions? Ooh, I don't know. Who knows? Potentially. But yeah, for me, I think it's a solid 7 out of 10 weekend for Pierre Gasly. If he maybe didn't have that wobble, I know I'm being super critical here, but it did potentially cost him 3 positions. If he didn't, at least cost him 2 positions to the Ferraris in the next corner. I think, yeah, it would have been potentially a 9 out of 10 for him. But I'm sticking with my 7 out of 10, and it's a good start to the year for Gasly compared to where it was for Alpine at last season. And you guys, well, you've given him a 6 out of 10. However, it is very close. There's only about a vote splitting it between 6 out of 10 and a 7 out of 10. But I still think a 6 is a little bit harsh because, yeah, that finishing results, this is the thing, results and finishing positions don't always reflect how the driver has fared throughout the day, because there can be a number of caveats as to why that is. But, yeah, 6 out of 10 is what you've given him. Lewis Hamilton, his first race in a Ferrari. And you know what? I've got one word to describe his race weekend. It was okay. That's about it, really. It was okay. And for me, I'm giving Lewis a 6 out of 10 because he didn't excel, but he also didn't flounder. Yes, he had that one moment in quali where he lost control of the car. But for the most part, in a brand new car, still getting to grips with a brand new engine and how it works with a brand new engineer who, I mean, we've all heard the radio messages. Can't be easy in those stressful conditions to have that in your ear. Hopefully it will get better, the communication there. But look, I think the only real thing for Lewis is that where he really faltered this weekend was that you could say he wasn't aggressive enough. He wasn't able to make up those 2 positions at the start of the race like his teammate Charles Leclerc was able to do. And there were a couple of times where he maybe could have gone for a move, but he just held back a little bit. I understand. You're in those conditions. You're also in your first race in that team, and you probably just want to bring the car home. And I don't think anyone expected Ferrari. Well, no, actually, I'm going to stop myself right there. For Ferrari, we expect them actually to make those positions. I meant to say we didn't expect him to finish in P10 come the end of the race before we knew all the shenanigans that were going to happen. Most of us expected Ferrari to at least let Hamilton and Leclerc down once or twice this year. I mean, they've already let them down once. It's the first race of the season. But yeah, I think there's positives to take, for sure, but we all expect more from him. We also expect a lot more from Ferrari. I do think that Hamilton and Leclerc were limited by the car this weekend. We'll get on to Charles Leclerc. But that car was just not quick enough. I mean, he got stuck behind a Williams. People will say, well, Lewis Hamilton should have been able to overtake Albon. Yeah, but that Ferrari, when you look back at the lap times, even when Charles Leclerc was in free air, Lewis Hamilton wasn't really that far off the pace of Charles Leclerc. That Ferrari just wasn't quick enough. It was falling back behind the Mercedes, and well, the Williams we know was a quick car. It's always been a quick car at Albert Park, and it definitely was here this weekend, especially in these conditions. So yeah, lots of work to be done on that Ferrari to try and improve it. It was not particularly great in qualifying, and I think for Lewis, he'll take stock that he was not that far behind Charles Leclerc in regards to pace, and I'm sure as that confidence builds, he will go for more moves, especially when it's in dry conditions and not the tricky conditions that we saw. But yeah, it was an okay weekend for him, an okay start that unfortunately was really overshadowed by the poor decision of Ferrari. Otherwise, they could have ended up both of them in the top 5 maybe, or at least a 5th and a 6th, gaining a couple of positions from where they actually started. And you all voted for Lewis a 5 out of 10. Oscar Piastri finished in P9 after starting P2. Well, this may be controversial, but for me, I'm giving Oscar Piastri a 6 out of 10. But how, Scott? How can you give Oscar Piastri a 6 out of 10? He was faultless all race. He was P2, he was just behind his teammate, less than a tenth in qualifying, and it was only that little mistake that meant that he ended up in P9. And what about the overtake on Lewis Hamilton on the last lap? Yeah, but this is F1. You're trying to fight for a Drivers' World Championship. You have a car that was dominant today, and he ended up making a small mistake that was very, very costly, and a mistake that really he shouldn't have done. There's more that he could have done if you compare it especially to Lando Norris, because they both went off in exactly the same manner at the same corner. Yet, what Oscar Piastri failed to do compared to Lando Norris is that Lando decided to get his car slowed sooner than Oscar and come back onto the track sooner before the corner, turn 13. Yet Oscar decided to rejoin the track further up, more towards the corner. And that's where he let himself down, because it's much harder to slow the car down over grass than it is gravel. And it turned out to be a very, very costly mistake. And look, drivers are going to make mistakes in those conditions. That's understandable. But he still did. And it turned out to be a very costly one. And for me, I can't give him any higher than that, because it meant that you ended up finishing in P9 rather than finishing in P2. And a P2 is going to be massively important. Yes, you want to win races and it is your home track, but ultimately you need to make the assessment of, well, I can just bring this home in P2 and I'm still in this title fight. It's only the first race of the year. Now he's got a much larger deficit already after the first race to make up over his teammate, who is probably going to be his closest competitor for the season. Of course, never write out Max. We know that. But yeah, a super, super costly mistake. But for me, while his qualifying was good, he still, once again, by the finest margins, got out-qualified by his teammate. And it is a very damning head-to-head for Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri in qualifying at the moment. I'm not saying for this season, but overall over the last season, or since he's joined F1 actually, Lando Norris has trounced Oscar in qualifying. So while it is the smallest margins, look, that can be the make or break of a race win and a season, and as we've seen now, on pole position. So yeah, a very costly mistake where more could have been done. And maybe you think I'm being harsh, but for me, you can't make a mistake that then means you finish in P9, no matter how well you've driven up to that point, and still get an upper end mark, you know? So, yeah, that's just my opinion. Let me know in the comments if you disagree. And, well, you guys, well, you do disagree because you've given him a 7 out of 10. It's close between a 7 out of 10 and an 8 out of 10. And, yeah, there's a lot fewer of you who have voted a 6 out of 10 and agree with me. But yeah, that's just my opinion, as I've said many times. That's what these ratings are all about. It'd be boring if we all agreed, wouldn't it? Charles Leclerc now, 6 out of 10. I think I expected more from Charles Leclerc. I expected more from Ferrari. And you may be going, hang on, it's the same as Lewis Hamilton's score. Yes, but Lewis Hamilton was in his first ever race in a Ferrari. Charles Leclerc is more experienced. Use that experience at the start of familiarity to jump 2 places ahead of Albon and Tsunoda, of his teammate. But he also lost those 2 positions later on in the race as well by spinning it under his own steam on the second safety car restart, or was it a few laps into that safety car restart? Who knows? He might have ended up pulling away from those 2 drivers and forcing his team into a better strategy call when it came to those changing conditions. I don't know, always some buts, but yeah, expected more from him, expected more from Ferrari. It wasn't a good qualifying from him either. So yeah, middle of the road score for him for what was a poor weekend for Ferrari as a whole. And I don't think the drivers could really get much more out of it. But Charles should have done better than where he finished. I mean, ultimately, yes, I know the strategy is where it is, but he's allowed Ferrari to make that decision while allowing Lance Stroll and Nico Hulkenberg to finish ahead of him. So that's not ideal, is it? But yeah. And you guys, well, it's a real weird one here because it's a split between a 6 out of 10 and a 8 out of 10. Very close with a 7 out of 10 as well. But I'm surprised so many of you have given him an 8 out of 10. Maybe there's a few sympathy votes there for the poor strategy call of Charles Leclerc and being on the receiving end of, being left out there and coming out in 9th place. So, yeah, that's Charles Leclerc and Ferrari. Well, I guess their season starts in China. Nico Hulkenberg might be controversial, but I'm giving him a 9 out of 10. Yes, it's not quite a 10 out of 10, and the reason for that is purely because, well, 2 reasons, actually. The first is he got out-qualified by his teammate in qualifying, obviously, not making it out of Q1. And the second one is that he didn't actually do much on race day. He massively benefited from a great strategy call by his team. Now, don't get me wrong, you need to put the car and keep it clean, especially in those conditions. However, I don't feel like he's necessarily outperformed that car over the duration of this weekend, which is why it isn't a 10 out of 10. The strategy team, I think, should be given a 10 out of 10, and the pit wall and the pit crew. And it is still a great performance from Nico Hulkenberg because to finish 7th is amazing in that Stake F1 car. But it's not purely down to his driving performance and outperforming that car, shall we say, to be where he was. I mean, because ultimately, who did he at that point? Who is he outperforming? He was outperforming his own teammate, who had been given a 5-second time penalty. He was outperforming Liam Lawson and the 2 Haas's. And then he's benefited from that great strategy call. So that's why it's not quite a 10 out of 10 for me, because I feel like it's just lacking that Stake F1 car. He didn't quite outperform it. Hopefully that logic makes sense. And because of the qualifying as well, I feel like he just has to be brought down a mark. Maybe if he out-qualified and got it through to Q2 and he was able to keep it there, and then that's an added reasons as to why he finished as high up as he did, then I think, he should have got a higher score. As I've mentioned before, where you actually finish doesn't necessarily mean your rating, you've driven that well. You know, sometimes fortune, you're just in the right place at the right time. And Hulkenberg was there in those conditions at the right place at the right time. Yes, you have to put your car in that position in the first place, but yeah, just slightly shy of a 10 out of 10. I can't believe I'm having to justify myself for not giving Hulkenberg a 10 out of 10. But and you guys, well, you gave Nico Hulkenberg a 7 out of 10. Interesting. A 7 out of 10 for Nico Hulkenberg. It is close to a 10 out of 10, so quite a big jump there in differences. But I'd like to hear your reasonings for why you've given Nico Hulkenberg a 7 out of 10 there. Maybe it's in line with mine, and maybe I'm scoring him a little bit higher, but we have the same rating. Lance Stroll. I'm going to give Lance Stroll an 8 out of 10. Similar to really how I've just spoken about Nico Hulkenberg. Kept himself out of trouble, but he was out-qualified by Alonso, and he was way off of Alonso's pace, and he benefited from a great strategy call. Kept it out of trouble, but that Aston Martin you would expect to beat a Stake F1 car. He didn't outperform anyone else really out on circuit. Was ahead of cars that you'd expect him to be ahead of, but some way off of his teammate and some way off of really the other cars up until that strategy call that you'd expect him to be closer to, i.e. Alpine, i.e. Tsunoda in the RB car. So, yeah, that's it really for Lance Stroll. But still, good point scoring for him. And you guys have given Lance Stroll a 7 out of 10. Now for Kimi Antonelli, and this is probably going to rile up a few of you because the fans have given him a 10 out of 10 overwhelmingly, but I'm giving him a 9 out of 10. I just can't give a driver, even though it's a rookie and even though he's 18 years old, I can't give a driver a 10 out of 10 for starting down in 16th because of a poor qualifying position in a car that should be easily making it into Q3. He should have been in Q3 in dry conditions at the bare minimum, especially with how he showcased how well he can drive in those wet conditions that we saw. The race day drive was brilliant. However, he is still having to make his way through and overtake cars that the Mercedes, which was the third fastest car in the day, the Mercedes should easily make mincemeat of, and that's what he did through a number of overtakes. The Albon overtake at the end was super impressive. It really was. But the fact he gained 12 positions is glossed over a bit by the fact of drivers crashing ahead of him. So he did really, I think, only make a couple of on-track overtakes. It was great to see them. But he was given a position by Hadjar, Alonso, Sainz, and Jack Doohan. He's gained 4 positions alone from those drivers going off. And then he has gained positions from a great strategy call as well by Mercedes. And I just think that those 12 positions gained just glosses over, really, what was still a great drive, but people are looking more so at the 12 positions gained and not necessarily how many he made on necessary merit. But I still think it was a great drive. I think it was exciting, and I'm looking forward to him qualifying much better and getting in the mix of things further up the grid, because I think he can, I really want to see this lad go wheel to wheel. He's ballsy. That move on Albon was great, and I want to see him further up the grid and not fighting his way down from 16th. I never truly liked when drivers have gained driver of the day for being in a car that is much quicker than the majority of the midfield and making their way up 10, 12 positions into 7th place, as an example. That's happened a lot of the times, and I think people don't necessarily look into the actual drive and performance itself. Still super impressive for a rookie. Still a 9 out of 10. But I feel like I hold that 10 out of 10 mark for just being something a bit special for me, really. Alex Albon initially finished P4, but had that rescinded and moved down to P5 because of Kimi Antonelli's pit lane infringement. The release, the unsafe release, was rescinded. So he finished P5, but for Alex Albon, it's a 10 out of 10. You can't not give him anything else, I think. He didn't drag the Williams. He performed and put that Williams into P6 and finished P5. Drove brilliantly, held Lewis Hamilton behind him for the whole race, which I don't think anyone expected. And what a great start to this season for him, especially when there was a lot of pressure on his shoulders with Carlos Sainz coming in. And as I've said before, there is a lot of pressure on his shoulders, and I did think that maybe he would fold under that pressure. But sometimes you raise your game and you perform to a higher level and standard when a better caliber of teammate, whether it be in football or any sport really. If you're playing with better players, you raise your game, and that is definitely what Alex Albon did this weekend. So in those conditions, faultless, P5, great start to Williams' season and to Alex Albon this year. So 10 out of 10. And, you're overwhelmingly in agreement as well. 10 out of 10 for Alex Albon. Quite close for an 8 out of 10 as well, which I'm a little bit surprised about, to be honest with you. I'm surprised why you'd give Alex Albon an 8 out of 10, because of what more do you want from a Williams to finish in the top 5 like that? So, great drive from Alex. George Russell, another 9 out of 10 for the Mercedes team, because George did what he needed to do this weekend. He was just solid, pure solid. He maximised that car to the best of its ability. It wasn't up to pace of the Red Bull of Max Verstappen. It wasn't up to the pace of the McLarens. He kept it completely out of trouble, and as George tends to do, when the car is kind of in its own race, and it's very, very, very easy when you're got no one else around you and you're not really racing for much, shall we say, especially racing the cars ahead of you. It's very easy to just have a small lapse in concentration in those conditions. And George didn't do that. and he ended up reaping the rewards for doing so because he nabbed another podium again, which arguably you'd say didn't really deserve in regards to the pace and performance of that Mercedes car. So yeah, for me, it's a 9 out of 10. Some will say, well, hang on, Kimi had such a better race, but I've mentioned the reasons for that. But for George Russell, I think it was a solid opening weekend for Mercedes. Kimi obviously recovered that after that poor qualifying. But for them, yes, some progress still to go to the top three drivers and those top two teams. But yeah, what more can you really ask for when you can't compete with those guys? You just have to be in it to win it, and George most definitely was. And you guys, well, you've ranked him slightly lower. No, apologies, you haven't. You've also agreed with me. Yes, we've agreed. A 9 out of 10 for George Russell as well. Maximilian Verstappen. It's a 10 out of 10 for me. Yes, it is, and that may surprise some of you, but Max drove his absolute socks off out of that Red Bull. To be honest, that Red Bull had no right fighting those McLarens for so long. It was a twitchy mess all weekend, and that did unfortunately come through in the end, as Max said he was starting to struggle on those intermediates as the track was starting to dry out. But how good was it seeing those front three in those wet conditions at the start just be toe-to-toe? And those three drove off into the distance. There was such a large gap. And yes, when the track conditions started to dry out a little bit, he started to struggle on the tyres because of the limitations of that Red Bull. But for him to qualify in the top three, as he did with that Red Bull looking like a twitchy mess, and for him to finish P2, of course, with the benefit of a couple of safety cars, because at one point he was 20 seconds behind the McLarens, a whole pit stop ahead the McLarens were up until that Alonso safety car. He still stayed in it, and he even had an opportunity to win the race at the end, which would have been typical Max Verstappen to win that race when the conditions came back into his favour. He is arguably one of the best wet drivers ever. Some will say he is, and I can see why. But yeah, he got the most out of that Red Bull car, and he will be looking at that, considering he came into this weekend saying, I have low expectations, we won't be fighting for the win, all of this, really downplaying things. For him to come away with second place, 18 points, I mean, this is what Max did all last year. He just ended up, even when that car was not at the races, he still got points. He didn't finish lower than 6th place last year, and that was once. That was Monza. So he is someone who grinds out results, and that's what makes him so hard to beat. And this race could be so important come the end of the season when that Red Bull wasn't a quick enough car to win. Yes, it was in the wet conditions. I still think Lando probably had the better of him in that McLaren because it had better performance overall. But yeah, for him to even have a sniff at the win was just, 10 out of 10 drive for Max. You can't ask much more than that, especially when you don't have a car that can win. And you guys have overwhelmingly voted for a 9 out of 10. Ooh, deducting him a slight point. I'd be interested to know why that is. Is it because he didn't win? But I feel like, I don't really know what else he could possibly do to not get a 10 there, really. Is it because he didn't win? I'm intrigued to know your thoughts, but yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below. And lastly, we have our race winner, Lando Norris. It's another 10 out of 10. I mean, that was a drive that stamps your authority down on the team, that you want to be the number one driver and that you want to win and prove you can win this World Championship this year. I was super impressed, most particularly with Lando, not with how he managed the race restarts under the safety car, not how he fended off Max Verstappen in the closing stages of the race, but the thing that showed me the most that Lando has grown and most particularly learnt from last season was his race starts. If you go back and watch it, he launched around the same as his teammate. Max actually had a better start behind him, but of course they've got track position. But he got just ahead of his teammate at the start. And as soon as he got ahead, he was aggressive and drove straight to the inside to cover off his teammate and ensure he didn't leave a sufficient gap into that first corner. Because it meant that the driver on the inside has the power. And I've said this with the racing rules as they currently are ahead of the apex. Max does this better than anyone. He never gives up the inside because he knows he has the whole power. He can send it up the inside, and as long as he stays within track limits, he can hold on to the position. You have all the power, and that is what Lando did. And I was so worried he wasn't going to do that this year, and it's so great to see him do it at the very first corner. He learnt the hard way, of course, back in Circuit of the Americas last year, leaving a large enough gap for Max Verstappen. Need to just cover it off entirely, and we know that was the worry heading into this race, was that Piastri would do such a thing down into the first corner, and he shut off any opportunity of doing that. And from then on, he just controlled that race. He had the pace over his teammate. I think he controlled it perfectly. It's so easy in those conditions to make those costly mistakes, as we saw Piastri do. Yes, he had that wobble. And I've seen people criticise him for having that wobble. But I think most drivers had a wobble at some point. Max even had a wobble. But Lando was smart enough and quick thinking enough to manage that situation and ultimately maintain the lead and pit at the right time and control that race from the start again. So, yeah, that if that was a Lewis Hamilton, a Max Verstappen, or a Charles Leclerc, I think they are drivers who lots of people would be lauding this performance as one of the best of their careers. And I definitely do think that is Lando's. He's only got 5, but that's 2 back-to-back wins now for him. He won the last race of the year and he won the first race of this season. I think that's easily the best win of his career. And yeah, we'll see if he'll be able to follow it up in China. I'm sure there'll be many more this year with, of course, a good McLaren underneath them. But yeah, you guys, well, it's a split vote between a 10 out of 10 and a 9 out of 10. Like to know the reasons for a 9 out of 10. Maybe you're being very harsh on him because of the slight mistake he made, but or because you're marking him down because he had the quickest car. But in those conditions, having the quickest car doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win. Of course, when it started to dry out, that shone through. But in those conditions, yeah, I think Lando couldn't have managed that any better, other than not going off when he did. But he still managed to control it and maintain the lead. So, yeah. And that's it, guys. That is my driver ratings for the Australian Grand Prix. I apologise for the lack of continuity with the T-shirt. It may have thrown you off a little bit. I'll try to fix that for the next one. But yeah, intrigued to hear your thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you agree, if you disagree with them, no doubt there's going to be a fair few disagreements, and that's fine. That's the beauty of these driver ratings. But I'm going to be scheduling these out moving forward, and we will keep a tally of them, and then we'll work out the average halfway through the season to see how drivers have been getting on and how they have been getting on at the end of the year as well. I think it's a fair way to assess a driver's performance over the duration of a season and not get bogged down in recency bias, which is very easy to do, I understand, in what is a very long F1 season now with 24 race weekends and 6 sprint races. We sometimes forget how drivers have performed in the early stages of a season, even in the middle as we head to the end of the season. So yeah, that's how we're doing it. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Hit the like and subscribe button. Turn those notifications on because we are going to be live for every single session this weekend for the Chinese Grand Prix. This first sprint race weekend. So remember that on Friday, there is a relevant session available for us to watch, the sprint qualifying. And then it's full guns ahead there with sprint race on the Saturday, qualifying for the main race straight after that, and then the race on Sunday. Thankfully for the drivers, China is forecast to be a dry weather race, but there is potential with things going on track and off track that could spice things up a bit. So be sure to tune in, guys, and we'll see you for this weekend. Bye.